Cool. So we're here to talk about self-driving cars, right? And the first thing that I think people don't realize about self-driving cars, there's a bunch of levels to these things. And the first one is kind of level 0. This is a car that isn't really self-driving at all. It's made as a designation for things that don't self-drive.
Right, and so as a little bit of background, we worked at Uber. I worked at Didi for a while. We work at a company called Cruise now, doing security for self-driving cars. So after we hacked cars, we moved on to try to figure out ways we could secure the newest technologies. And so self-driving cars are pretty cool things. We'll talk lots about it, but not these things. These are the cars that I grew up with, and they're not going to get hacked. They're the safest from cyber tech you want to be. Probably not very safe from an actual real-world life usage.
So, as we move on to the next level of these things, we have things like a Jeep Cherokee, right? And these are cars that have some kind of assistance available to you. They'll kind of brake if it's about to hit something. It'll kind of slightly adjust the steering. It may park for you. But generally speaking, the driver is still responsible for all control.
Right. So this idiot. Oh, wait, that's me.
This idiot.
So this is. We'll talk about this in a bit, but we crashed Andy Greenberg into a ditch there, and he's from New York, and they don't know how to drive cars, I guess.
Yeah. So he also cried too. For the record, Andy Greenberg cried.
Yeah, he was terrified. Anyway, so he couldn't get it out, so local Midwestern boy had to get in the car and retrieve it from the ditch, which I did do.
Exactly. But as you move on, right, you have kind of partial levels of automation. This gets us into the Tesla territory. I don't know if they took the name autopilot off. I think they did, right? But essentially, this will give you some ability for the car to drive and kind of make decisions on its own. But at the end of the day, still for level 3, the driver is still responsible. So while you may have this system that does things that look like autonomous driving, in actuality, when it comes down to it, the driver is still responsible for all these things that happen.
Right. So it'll self-drive for a bit, but if you're not holding on to the steering wheel, it'll beep at you because you're supposed to be responsible, despite what the ads that Tesla put out sometimes say. And GM has a similar technology, and there it has a camera that looks in your eyes, and if it notices your eyes aren't looking at the road, it beeps at you. So these are technologies to make sure, yes, we're helping you. We're not trying to drive the car by itself.
You're not allowed to get sleepy.
Right.
So, level 2. So level 3 now is we're getting to a point where the car in certain situations doesn't expect intervention. I think a good example is Audi's traffic jam pilot. Essentially, you could sit there and read the newspaper or Twitter or whatever people read in the car, and it will do its thing for you without much expectation for you to take over.
Right. So in this case, it's in a very particular situation. It will drive for you, but you get out of that situation, or it finds an error that it can't handle, then you're supposed to take back control. So you don't have to pay attention all the time, but you have to still be kind of ready to hop in if something goes wrong.
So this takes us to level 4, and level 4 is what Charlie and I are concerned with, and what we do. As he said before, we used to work at Uber on their level 4 cars, and we now work at Cruise Automation on our kind of level 4 cars. That's a picture of one there. These are designed to solely drive themselves. There doesn't even need to be a driver in the car. There may not even be a steering wheel and pedals. It is probably limited in area. It's not going to go everywhere. You're not going to go to grandma's house. But if it maps some area, this car is capable and supposed to be capable of driving without human intervention.
All right. So for a particular fixed area and particular conditions, like weather conditions, the car can drive itself with no human intervention. And when we talk about securing self-driving cars, we're talking about this. We're not talking about securing Teslas or...
So, a lot of times people are like, oh, what about self-driving cars? And they'll talk about a Tesla or something in traffic jam. While those are interesting, these are really what piques our interest, and this is kind of where our expertise lies now, because we're on kind of company number 2 for me, company number 3 for Charlie, of figuring out how to secure these things against attacks.
I think we're running out of companies to work for.
We are running out of companies. This might be it. We're going to work at Cruise forever now. Level 5 is basically Kit from Knight Rider. It will go anywhere and do anything and handle any situation. We're not there yet.
Bank robbery, not a problem.
Yeah,
Kidnapping.
send
it's
Kit
got
to
you.
rob the bank for you. Haul it out. No one's driving. No big deal. This is basically the end goal, the holy grail for self-driving, right? You set a car on the road, and it can literally go anywhere, dirt road, in the city, whatever. It's Kit from Knight Rider. Hopefully it comes someday.
Yeah, we're not there. We don't know how to get there, but someday, hopefully, we'll live in a world where that's the case. So there's lots of companies that are working on this problem, and some have done more than others. If you look at some of these statistics, you'll see, well, like one of the things, and some of these statistics are a little old, but the thing that's sort of amazing is Waymo, for example, has driven 4 million. Actually, they've driven 10 million miles now. So like imagine how long, like a human's never going to drive anywhere close to that.
If you have a car with 100,000 miles on it, right, you've probably had that car for quite some time. Think about orders of magnitude more miles driven.
Right, and the reason they have to drive so many miles is the cars need to be tested in like these weird corner cases that maybe you see once in a lifetime. But they need to be able to see that enough to test it and make sure it handles that situation and maybe iterate and like maybe it didn't handle it, so they add some new code and then they got to test it again. But you can't just make these weird once in a lifetime things happen spontaneously. You have to just drive and drive and drive until you see those things actually happen.
And you'll notice there's kind of 3 names listed here. But you'll go online and you'll see 40 companies that are doing driverless cars, right? And they're doing their demo, and it's on the highway, and it's great. That's awesome. You know what's really hard to do? Pull up to a stoplight with someone crossing when they're not supposed to, a bicyclist on your right, someone coming behind you, and you got to make a blind left. And that's why you have to drive all these miles, and that's why this is a really hard problem. It's not driving on the highway. That's generally okay, and people are smart and can figure that out. It's really the crazy interactions and crazy situations that you get yourself into as a driver that requires all these miles to be driven.
And the other thing to notice about those 3 companies is their goal, at least for now, is to end in a ride-sharing kind of situation. So none of these companies at the current time plan to sell the car. So they're not building self-driving cars intending to sell them to people who will just drive them or have them drive them around. They're set up to be like, you would call one, hop in, it would take you somewhere, you would hop out, and it would drive off. And that's going to have a lot of implications when we talk about the security of the cars. So there's what a Waymo looks like. Yeah. It's in a Pacifica.
I think Waymo recently, too, just were the first ones to sign that they could operate without a driver in the vehicle in California. So
yeah, and they've been doing that already in Arizona.
And Waymo has been doing this for 10 years. Google, so they've been kind of doing this whole project the longest.
I think their car is kind of ugly.
I'm not a Pacifica guy. Not a Pacifica guy. Here's the Uber car that both Charlie and I spent some time, securing. I think it's a better looking car than that Pacifica minivan, personally.
We're having the Consumer Reports car selection up here.
It's a pretty slick looking Volvo XC90. Again, they've been on the streets for a while. They're off the streets now for a bit, and they're still doing active development for these things.
But yeah, they had an actual ride-sharing service before anyone else that any person could call for an Uber, and sometimes one of these would show up.
So I lived in Pittsburgh, where the development of this was mainly based, and it was cool because the way they mapped the city, my house ended up being on that map. So I would get one of these kind of to and from work almost every day. So I got to take driverless cars to work every day, which is rad.
Right.
And it didn't cost me anything, so it was cool.
So if you like, one of the things you want to look at on these pictures is what's different about this car from an XC90 you would just buy from a lot. And right away you notice there's stuff on the roof. So there's going to be like some LiDARs and some other sensors. There's going to be cameras along the edges and more radars and other things. So just keep an eye out for things that look different, and we'll talk more about like the actual differences in a bit. But you'll notice like it does. If you saw that driving down the road, you'd be like, what is that thing? Yep. So they look different than normal cars.
Oh, buddy, look at that. That looks like a beaut, huh? That's probably the best looking one out
I
of
would
all
invest in this company big time.
I would definitely. I would definitely.
Sales
invest.
pitch. We said we weren't gonna do one, but
we're gonna turn
did.
this into a sales pitch real quick.
No.
No. So this is the first, second, third generation cruise vehicle. Again, you'll notice a bunch of different sensors on it, right? You have radars that try to see things at short distances, long distances, LiDARs on the roof, and a bunch of other sensor packages. The other big differentiator in this car than the other two is this one is purely electric. So you're no longer dealing with hybrid vehicles. The reason that everyone uses hybrid vehicles is, we'll talk later, you have these massive computes in the car, and you need all that electricity. But the cool thing about this is you no longer have to worry about things like oil changes or putting gasoline in it. These things are purely electrical, and they can get a charge and be on their way.
The other thing that's kind of rad about these is, like, say, Uber buys these cars from Volvo, but this is a car that's made in a General Motors factory because General Motors owns a bunch of Cruise. So this self-driving car rolls out of the factory ready to go instead of buying a car and adding a bunch of crap to it. So here's a video of a self-driving car if you've never seen one. So you can see on the right in the middle is what the car is seeing, and this is displayed to the users, the driver, or the passengers, I guess. When it's turned, you can see the steering wheel turn. It's kind of wild to see a steering wheel turn in a car.
Yeah. Has anyone been in one? Raise of hands. Anyone?
One person.
Sweet. Yeah, it is. It's a pretty wild experience. Like, the car's driving, the steering wheel's turning, the person isn't touching the gas and brake. It's a great experience, and it's cool to see.
Right, and it's wild at first, and then you do it a bunch, and then it's not. It's just sort of boring, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
I guess.
I used to take like a selfie every time I was in the car, and then I was just like, just go, just let it drive. Hurry.
All right, so let's talk about some of the differences that you'll see, and we already sort of talked about this, but it's basically a bunch. It takes a car and it adds a bunch of hardware to it, and it makes the car like way more expensive. It's more expensive than you'd want to buy, even if you could buy it, unless you were some millionaire or something.
Yeah, exactly. So to give you an example, some of those things like a LiDAR on the roof, depending on which one you buy, can be $75,000 for a single device, and it can break. And you can maybe brick it if you do bad stuff. Like, these are really expensive right now. The cost of these will come down in time as we figure out, as a technology group, how to make them cheaper. But right now, it's prohibitively expensive for an individual to do this type of thing.
So the biggest difference you'll notice in the car is the roof with all the sensors. And so here you'll see this is them installing it in a factory. And you can see a bunch of those little things that look like big hockey pucks. Those are LiDARs. And we'll talk a little bit about what LiDAR looks like in a bit. I don't know if you see anything else, but usually on the front of the car, there'll be some extra radars. Yeah. There'll be a bunch of cameras. I
think on the sensor package where the black dots are, those are cameras. And those aren't like, dash cam cameras. These are super high resolution cameras capable of, doing image matching of and classifications of things like cars and bikes and people.
So LiDAR, we talked a lot about. This is what the computer basically sees. So LiDAR is, in this one, it's spinning. It's shooting out pulses of light, I guess, and recording how long it takes to come back. And you get an idea of what's out there. And then it has some sort of algorithms that try to map that into things that it can classify. So here you can see the blue boxes it thinks are people, and it is. And the red boxes are cars. And so from that, it can determine what the world looks like. So you look at something like a Tesla. They're trying to do everything with pure cameras with images, which is kind of like how humans work. But all the three that we've been spending a lot of time on use LiDARs because this is kind of the best technology for this.
What's crazy is most people use Velodyne LiDARs right now, and I think David Hall and his brother are the guy that invented that company. I'm a dummy, but they somehow figured out how to measure bouncing of light using electronics, which kind of blows my mind, right? You're using electricity to measure the speed of light, and that's essentially how LiDAR works. It just shoots lasers about and figures out how fast it bounces back off the things that it hit. The compute is the main difference. I think, especially we've been kind of chatting about car security for 5-6 years at this point, and most people think of, this is just an ECU, this one unit. The compute needed to process all this images and LiDAR data points and radar and kind of time synchronize that and make it work is more like a Bitcoin mining rig than it is an ECU in a regular car, right? A massive amount of compute is needed to do this stuff.
Yep. And so there's also going to be a part where you've got this huge computer. It's got all the sensors that it's reading from, and then it's got to decide what to do. So it's like, okay, I want to start turning the steering wheel. So it needs to communicate that to the rest of the car. And so the rest of the car is probably just a standard car, which is talking like a CAN bus, all the components. And so there needs to be some sort of link between this big computer making decisions and the CAN bus. And so usually there'll be some extra ECU that translates from whatever the computer wants to talk to the CAN bus and tell it to do things like, speed up or slow down or turn the steering wheel.
Yeah, the big point for this right now is everyone who's doing kind of self-driving is taking a car that was originally built to be a passenger vehicle, like have a driver in it, and kind of making it a self-driving car. So that's kind of why this architecture is necessary. In the future, you could see companies building specifically self-driving cars. So when they're designing a car, they're not even designing it to have a steering wheel in it or pedals or things like that, right? Compute could directly make these actuators do things. So this is kind of a byproduct of just the world we're in right now.
Not to mention the computers we use are just like regular computers. They're not specially designed to be in a car. So they're not going to have some dedicated interface to talk to the car components. Next up is the riders in the car have to have some sort of interface to talk to the car. So right now, this is on the left. You can see what Waymo's looks like. On the right is Uber's, and they're basically just like tablets of some kind. And this you can use to say like, tell the car to stop because it's supposed to be a ride-sharing service, or like where you want to go.
Take a selfie of yourself and you're on your trip.
Yeah,
put it on Twitter.
You could do that. So some of them do have built-in selfie-taking technology.
Uber's had a thing where you could hit a button and it would take a selfie and post it and hashtag it for you.
It's the future.
It is.
But another thing you'll notice is these things are used to provide data to the passenger about what the car is seeing to give them some sort of confidence. Like you can see that the car sees there's a person. You can see that the car is intending to turn. Because otherwise you're like, what the hell is going on? So it's nice that it's just a way for the computer to kind of reassure the passenger that everything's okay.
Yeah. Right now they're using them, as Charlie said, as reassurance. Hey, yes, I see those. That's a bike and that's a person, and we know a stop sign is coming up, and we see the lights red, not green, stuff like that. Ethernet. So again, we're using these massive computes, and they need to send more data than what's usually sent on a vehicle bus. In comes Ethernet, which is great, right? Because we understand this. Ethernet is kind of the wave of the future when it comes to automotive because you have more bandwidth, it's faster, kind of more universally understood than things like CAN bus, and that's essentially how all this stuff communicates with each other. Network switches, compute devices that have Ethernet. Think of this just much like a data center you have in an office, but it's in a car.
Right, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's good for security because CAN basically sucks for security, and we know how to secure our stuff on Ethernet, so it's a big help the more stuff we can get on Ethernet. So, like, we've seen we're not going to share exactly how the cars we've seen are built, but we've seen 2 or 3 different versions of it, and basically they all have this sort of architecture, and there's going to be some differences, but they're all going to have some sort of sensors hooked up to Ethernet, and the reason that is because the types of sensors you buy off the market are already set up for Ethernet. They're not set up for any kind of other thing. So there's definitely going to be some Ethernet component. There's going to be this big computer we talked about. There's going to be some device that communicates to the outside world, and then there's going to be a bunch of vehicle ECUs like your brake controller or your engine, and those are going to be on CAN, and then there's going to be some link in between them. And so these are the components. The way you hook them up might be a little bit different. So it might, instead of looking like this, it might look more like this. So maybe some of the things like cameras are plugged directly into the computer, or your telematics might be directly plugged to the computer, or maybe the computer is plugged straight kind of into the module that goes to the CAN network instead of going to Ethernet. So there's like a few variations, but for the most part, the topology of the inside of the car looks exactly like this.
Yeah, so there's no kind of set standard, right? Like people just make it up, and it's definitely not this.
Well, for an advanced company, it's not like this.
For people competing in this space right now, it is not that.
Right. It's more like this. So yeah. It's just your trunk is just full of computer pieces and switches and massive computers, and it's like you're not gonna be able to put your suitcase in the trunk anymore. Like just deal with that.
Yeah. Just don't take a suitcase. Just buy new clothes where you go and just throw them in the trash. Yeah, but just to go back to the previous picture, these are kind of prototyping, right? If you would see one of these in productions, you definitely don't have a Netgear Soho switch in the back, right? Like you have real actual parts, but you do stuff like this when you want to figure out if something works.
Right, and then this is how it looks now, but maybe in 20 years it's going to look like one little tiny ECU, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, look, these things, right? I mean, This would have been a supercomputer so long ago. You would only think that things like that in cars will get smaller and smaller as time goes on.
Yep. Okay, so this is like a super important point, is that you get a lot of people talking about like how do cars know where they're at, right? And people just assume it's GPS because that's how we get around. Like when you want to get from point A to point B, you put it in your Google Maps and it takes you there via GPS. But GPS is not accurate enough for self-driving cars. We have to use this technology called localization. And the way this works is you send out a car first. It takes a very detailed map of where everything is. It knows where every speed bump, every pothole, every bush, everything in the world, it knows where it is exactly. And then you drop the car down in the middle of some place, and it can tell, it takes a LiDAR reading, and by comparing its LiDAR reading to these previous readings that this mapping car knows, it knows exactly where it is to within, like, I don't know, a centimeter or something.
Yeah, you're dealing with GPS, you're dealing with give or take a couple meters, right? For the high resolution localization needed for self-driving cars, we're talking centimeters, right? So it definitely can tell if the curb is a foot away or a half foot away, right? So this is very important. And again, this is what level 4 is. Level 5 is Kit from Knight Rider driving wherever he wants. Level 4 is, hey, we've mapped this city, or we've mapped this portion of this city to the centimeter level. Now we're going to use these sensors to do a thing called like background subtraction, right? We know what the world looks like. What's new here?
Right, and if you want to know like why, the big difference between level 4 and level 5 is this map. So if you didn't need the map, we could get to level 5. But the map is so important to us right now because that's the way that the LiDAR works, and that's the way we figure out where things are there. And he mentioned the subtraction thing. And what that means is like if you've taken a scan of a particular road like 100 times, and then all of a sudden you take another scan and there's this new thing, then you know that wasn't there before. That's probably like a person or a car or something that's not normally there. So it's like too hard computationally to figure out everything like you've never seen it before. But by figuring out what the world usually looks like and comparing that to what you see now, you are able to pull things out of that.
And you might say, Chris and Charlie, doesn't that mean that these cars are on the street constantly mapping and looking at things because a new construction site could pop up tomorrow? Yes, these cars are always out mapping. Most of the time, if you would see self-driving cars on the street, they're mapping cars, getting new information and uploading those maps, which are updated, daily, bi-daily. So yes, these cars are always out in the street right now figuring out what's new and letting the other cars know.
And so here's how like a video of localization in action. So you can see that what the car is seeing, and the car is the thing in the red. And as you pull back, you can see in the white is what the world looked like in different spots to the car. And so by comparing what it sees in the green to all these different sort of images it has in white, it knows exactly where it's at. So that's how localization works. And we'll talk about why this is important, mostly because if you see a lot of things in the paper about GPS and how like, oh, well, we'll spoof GPS and make all of the self-driving cars crash. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, they don't use GPS. So you can spoof all you want, and the cars are going to use localization.
Spoof away, man. Spoof
Right.
away. They also require a certain level of connectivity, right? I mean, in most modern cars, this is a nice luxury feature. You can hit a button and have someone to talk to, and they can figure out diagnostics. But again, as Charlie said before, the kind of big players in this are doing it for ride sharing. So you're going to need to know where the car is, where it needs to go. It's going to want to tell you stuff. Hey, here's how fast I'm going. Here's the software I'm running, things like that.
Right. And so some cars today aren't connected at all, but self-driving cars are always going to have some connectivity. Finally, let's talk about hacking.
Whew.
Here's my boys. So a lot of people think that we were the first people to hack a car. Not true. These guys were. So a group of academics back in 2011, I think, they hacked a car, and the way it was this beautiful car over here. We want to talk about how hacking works against cars, because if you don't understand how actual attacks work, you can't build effective defenses. So we'll talk real quickly about all the different attacks that have happened, and that'll help steer us in ways to figure out how to defend against them. So the way the academics did it, they had 2 ways they did it. So the first one was through a Bluetooth vulnerability. So the head unit, like the radio of the car, had a vulnerability in the way they process Bluetooth. So if these guys were within 30 meters of the car, like Bluetooth range, they could send some Bluetooth frames, hack into it, get code execution on the head unit, and then they want to do something like control the brakes. But it turned out that the radio, the head unit was not on the same CAN bus as the brakes. So they couldn't just directly send messages to the brakes. There was this gateway module in between. And the gateway module separated those two networks, but they were able to reprogram the gateway module to let them do whatever they wanted. And so one of the things they wanted to do is send messages to the brakes, and they were able to do that. And we'll see this is like a common thing in car hacking and something that's really important to think about. All right, so that was their first attack. Like being within 30 meters is like pretty rad. You don't have to like touch the car, but still like.
I wouldn't say it was cool, not rad, by my definition.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. If you say so, dude.
I do.
All right. So they found another version of their attack, which was stronger, which was through the cellular network. So this one didn't have that 30-meter range limit. It also had some other limitations, which I'm not getting into. But anyway, this one was pretty good. So they could just dial into a car because the car had these cellular modems. There was a vulnerability. They had code execution on it. And that particular telematics unit was already on the same bus as the brakes. So they could just, in 2 steps, they could hack into the telematics unit, send messages to the brakes, and control the brakes. And again, this was they could do from anywhere. It's pretty rad.
It definitely was rad.
Right, and this is what basically inspired us to get into car hacking, is reading this paper.
Right, this is no limitation. This car is just somewhere in the United States, and they can hack into it and apply the brakes. That's wild.
So here's a video of them doing their attack. So it's not like Andy Greenberg style. It's very safe,
They're
controlled.
safe,
Right.
organized.
They care about people's safety. So yeah, so you see like the guy's got a crash helmet on. Like I don't think we gave Andy Greenberg a crash helmet, did we?
His hair is his helmet.
Yeah. So anyway, they're driving. They're gonna remotely attack this car, and they lock up the brakes and make it come to a stop on a race track.
Yeah, just like us.
Yeah, exactly like that. So anyway, it's pretty awesome. So that was their attack. And like when I read that paper, I was like, dude, let's do this. Like
I was stoked.
Right. It's like, but when you read a paper and you want to get into it, it's like, how do you expand on that? Like, how do you extend their work? And the problem from us was they did everything. So they did from like, the complete execution of car hacking remotely to controlling the brakes. Like there was nothing for us to really do, which was kind of a bummer. But one thing that was different about what they did and versus what we did was they didn't really publish anything. So they didn't say what kind of car it was, although we know what kind of car it was. Like we're not dumb. They didn't say what kind of car it was. They didn't say what the vulnerability was. They didn't say what messages they sent. They didn't say how they controlled the brakes. It was just like, hey, we did this, and I totally believe them. But there was no way you could use that to make cars safer or to make car hacking, like to learn how to do car hacking. It wasn't useful to really anyone except just as a welcome awareness of this problem.
Imagine Alpha 1 releases Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit, and it's basically like, yeah, you can use stack data to hack a computer. Have fun, y'all. Right? So we're like, no, information needs to be free. We want to release it all.
Right. So there's us. So and a few years later, in 2014, we did the Jeep, and we released all our tools, and we
like hundreds of pages of paper, all our tools, all our data. We want people to learn from this. We want other people to go and kind of do this stuff. We're only 2 guys. We can only look at so many cars.
Right. And the other thing that was different was not really something we did, but technology had improved from the car they had, I think, was a 2010 car, and ours was a 2014. So in 4 years, car technology improves a lot. And so now the only reason they could only do brakes was that was the only thing that was computer controlled. But now we have steering and acceleration, so we had more things we could play with, and we did. So let's look at how our attack worked. And you'll start to notice similarities, and that's kind of the point of talking about this, is we had remote code execution through the cellular connection of the car. We had to reprogram this gateway chip because we couldn't directly send messages to things. We reprogrammed that chip. This is exactly what the academics did. And then we could send messages to the brakes and steering. Yep. So very similar to the attack the first attack that the academics did.
But we had steering control because at the time when they did it, there wasn't things like steering assist or parking assist. But when we had this car, there was, which were computer controlled. So that gave us the ability to do more.
Right. It wasn't that we were smarter and figured out how to control steering. It was just that their computer didn't have the ability to control steering.
And as time moves on, right, more things in the car are computer controlled. That's an inevitability. So this isn't the end of it.
All right, ready? So here's our demo. It's also in a test track in a cornfield.
we were cool. It was in a cornfield. Don't worry. We're fine.
You'll notice in the video, remotely attack into the car, control the steering, turn the steering wheel to the right. I'm hacking, he's driving, and you'll notice if you see it that the steering wheel turns, he tries to fight back and get control of the car, but it's too late. We're already.
I need to take some more high-performance driving school lessons. I couldn't counter steer fast enough, and we
Right.
wrecked.
So that was our attack. Since then, there's been some other attacks that you may or may not have heard of. So in 2016, the Keen team from China hacked into a Tesla, and the way their attack worked was, again, a very similar diagram you'll notice. Theirs was a web browser exploit that ran on what they call the CID, which is like the head unit, the big screen in the Tesla. So there's a web browser exploit. So they got control of that, but again, that particular component can't send messages directly to the CAN bus, and so they had to have this gateway in between. They reprogrammed the gateway, just like all these other people did. Then they could send messages to the brakes and make it do stuff. And that's their attack.
Yeah. Another item of note, too, is they exploited an old WebKit bug. So this was like a known vulnerability in WebKit, and it just so happened that, shockingly, the car didn't have the most up-to-date version of the browser, right? So this, again, is where the future of automotive Internet things is going, is they're going to borrow where they can, right? You don't want to write a brand new web browser. You're going to use something that's known. But at the same time, if you can't keep it up to patch level, bugs exist.
Right. And so one of the things also to think about this is our attacks and the academic attack, you could do from anywhere in the country. You could attack any car you wanted. Here, because it's an attack against a web browser, you have to get the victim to do something. You have to get them to click a link or to to be nearby and try to intercept some messages and trick their web browser to do something. So anyway, it was a much harder attack. It wasn't quite as dangerous in the sense of scale as the other attacks we were talking about. So let's see their demo.
上车。
So they're going to apply the brakes here.
我靠，好，我靠，搞定了。
So that's that. Here's driving. This message cracks me up that you should only do this if you're a security researcher. I guess we can do that. I don't know.
We're given permission. We're good.
They're implicitly telling us we can do exactly that. So that's their attack. You'll notice like it's the same kind of thing. It's like you get your foot in the door of the car. You reprogram something that's keeping you from sending CAN messages. Then you send CAN messages and make it do stuff. So in 2018, they weren't done. The same exact guys, Keen team, they found a vulnerability in the BMW i3. This vulnerability was a little different. So here they had, if they could trick the cellular modem to connect to their malicious base station, they could send text messages to it. Again, this meant that you had to be kind of local to the car, so you weren't going to be able to attack any car. You had to be nearby. And then again, there was this gateway in the way of controlling messages to the steering or brakes or whatever. And this time, they did not figure out a way to reprogram the gateway. So progress is being made. This is like an example of effective defense in the sense that they did get code execution onto the head unit, but they were not able to control the brakes because of this gateway module. So like you can start to learn lessons like, oh, okay, well, if we have a gateway module, let's like make it really tough that you can't just reprogram it really easy.
Yep.
Seems reasonable, right?
So, again, we're concerned mainly with remote attacks, right? Yes, there are a bunch of local attacks you can do, but at the same time, if you're in the car, you can also just light it on fire or whatever if you want, right? Local attacks with physical control, that's our biggest concern, right? Because that's when things start dealing with passenger safety, driver safety. If you saw those diagrams, you kind of saw how it all went down, and they all had similarities. It was kind of some unauthenticated access to the vehicle, and then the ability to reprogram portions to do whatever you want, and then the ability to make actuators perform physical actions. So it's pretty kind of well known how these attacks all work, and then at least that gives us a good blueprint to how to secure these things.
Right. And of all that research we talked about, that's the only research that's ever been done that showed remote attack to physical control. So of all the things you hear about in car hacking, like this is it. It's those four examples, really three examples. The fourth one was kind of like what doesn't work. So don't be like too super scared of car hacking. Like It's never been done by a bad guy. It's only been done by researchers, and only those 3 groups have done it.
But that's not to say we're not concerned with it, right? The stakes are just higher. If my Amex gets stolen with some browser exploit and they got all my banking information, someone's going to make me whole. The reason that we are so proactive about this is it does involve human safety, human life. So that's why we're really serious about it, even though there aren't active exploit campaigns going on right now.
Chris, tell us about some advantages of self-driving car security.
Woo, man. So at first you look at this, right? And this is a daunting task. This is a picture of a prototype of what Cruise's future cars may look like. You'll notice no steering wheel, no pedals, right? Nothing for anyone to actually drive with. It's basically a seat on wheels and it goes. At first, this is a daunting task. Well, before even, as Charlie mentioned, when we hacked the steering of the Jeep, I at least had a shot. I
You
sucked
failed.
at driving. I failed miserably, but I had a shot to grab that wheel and correct the car.
Does that
right?
make you feel better that you had a shot?
No, I don't feel good about myself in general, but that's beyond the scope of this presentation. But yeah, in here, right, there's no shot. This is all computer controlled. There's no physical things for anyone to grab onto, maybe other than the oh shit bar, right?
So it's really important to get security right in these kinds of cars. So tell us.
All right, so the nice thing is we have advantages. A lot of the problems, and I'll use the Jeep again because I'm most familiar, the biggest problem there was we were able to compromise this over the cellular airwaves. There was no way for this to be updated over the airwaves, right? Tesla has that advantage, but at the time, Fiat Chrysler didn't. The cool thing about self-driving cars are, right now they're all owned by the company, not by the people. That means they come home every night. That means they can get updates every night. That means we can ensure, if we are using some open source software, that at least on a daily, if not more than multiple times a day, they are capable of getting updates. They're locked away. It's not that these things right now are just sitting on the street. They come home to these garages. There's security guards. It's not like people are in there physically tampering with them. So we have some advantages right now from a self-driving effort that permits us to ensure that these cars get updates and have some level of physical safety. There's not someone monkeying around in it all day.
Yeah, you also get the chance when the car comes in every night to get charged up or whatever that you can check it out. Like, does it look like someone's tampered with it? Is there something that's been busted open? Is there any like weird thing with the hardware?
There's pre-flight checks before every single one of these goes out, right? There's physical inspection, there's software inspection before they even go on the road. So it's not like it's just YOLO and they go wherever they want. Like, there's a process to make this happen.
Right, and compare that to a car that you just buy from a dealer and the dealer sells it to you, they may never see it again. It might be 10 years later, it's still on the road, it's never been into a shop, and you have no idea what's going on with it anymore.
Figure this, we bricked 3 head units in the Jeep and no one knew that we even tried to hack it over that period of time, right?
Well, my dealer knew.
Well, your dealer did, but as a whole, they didn't, right?
Right.
If for some reason this car comes in and something in it's bricked, we're like, well, let's do an investigation of this. This is weird.
Yeah, my dealer just knew I was having some serious radio problems.
Sold you a lemon.
I know, they really did. They finally got it right on the 3rd time. So the other thing you get from the fact that we're a ride-sharing service that owns cars as opposed to selling cars is we can monitor where they go all the time. We can monitor what they're doing. They're sending us messages constantly saying everything's okay or not okay. And where you wouldn't necessarily want that on a car that you bought. Like, I don't want Ford to know that I'm driving my Mustang down the road or whatever. But it's okay in this situation because it's you don't own the car.
Yeah. No, I mean, we have to secure these things, but at the same time, when you have a constant stream of telemetry information coming back, you know more about what is on the car and what's happening in real time. You could imagine having things like an intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system that's like, hey, I saw some weird-ass Ethernet frames, and then you can act accordingly.
So one of the most important things about these cars, since we're not trying to sell them, is we don't have to try to sell all these features that security people hate and that customers love. So you don't want to, you wouldn't sell a car necessarily now that you couldn't sync your phone to with Bluetooth because like all your competitors are doing that, so you have to do it. But you can take the Bluetooth out of a self-driving car because it's a self-driving car. You're in it for 10 minutes. You don't need to sync your phone to it.
You can physically remove a radio chip. Right? Like, it's not, you don't even have to say like, oh, hey, let's not have this feature enabled like in some cars. Like, you can say remove that 5 from the board.
Right, and so you end up in a situation where one of the attacks, the one the academics did, that just can't happen in this car because it doesn't even have a Bluetooth chip anymore. So yay, and you can do that same for Wi-Fi or the stock head unit. You can just rip that out because you don't need to be jamming on your tunes while you're in a self-driving car.
And at least for the time being, these self-driving cars are ride-sharing cars, right? Which means I think Uber released a stat at one point that was like the average ride is 2 miles or less, right? People are going to be in these cars for minutes, not hours, so they're not actually too concerned with having Bluetooth or any of this other stuff. They kind of just want to get where they're going.
And so we can use that, like the best thing you can do instead of trying to secure a Wi-Fi stack or secure a Bluetooth stack is just remove it, and then it's definitely not going to have any bugs.
We are very unpopular gentlemen sometimes when we're like, oh yeah, just rip that out. Like physically, like rip it out. And
Like, but a customer might want.
but somebody might be like, I don't want it. It's out.
So that's basically our job is removing code and removing hardware. That's the biggest thing that we contribute to the car.
We benefit through obscurity at this point too. Now, obviously, this isn't true security, but at this given time, you can't go grab one of our cars with one of our sensor packages and our compute in it. Only we have those things. It took Charlie and I 9-ish months with the Jeep, and we physically had it in our persons, and we're kind of reversing stuff all day long. Right now, this is one of our advantages. You can't go out and grab this car.
Hey, Chris, why don't you hack an airplane?
The reason I don't hack an airplane, because I can't get an airplane. I can't keep an airplane in my house to figure out how to hack it.
Right.
And that's just a matter of fact. I'm not,
Right.
So the same applies to this.
So despite what you read in the press, you can't just hack something without ever having seen it, like no matter how good you are. So
the only person I've ever seen blind pop something on the first try was Neil Mehta. And this was like some weird service. And this was back when I was at IBM X-Force. That's the only time I've witnessed that happening.
And that was before, like...
That was before there were stack canaries, ASLR,
Right.
DEP, any of that stuff, right?
Yep.
And Neil's badass, but like that's what I'm saying. It's impossible to do this if you're just blind.
Right. I mean, we don't rely on this solely. It just happens to be something that it works in our favor. So, I mean, it's not all happy things. Like we're talking about how easy self-driving car security is. Well, it's kind of hard too. So let's talk about some of the things that make it really hard.
So before we talked about Ethernet and how it's basically ubiquitous when it comes to self-driving cars and probably the modern automobile. The hard part about this right now is most Ethernet is UDP packets. Just hammer as much information across the wire as possible. That means when you talk to a supplier, you're like, oh, okay, we're going to do TLS to ensure that communication's secure. We don't even have a TCP stack. And you're like, well, shit.
They're
It's
like,
going to be hard to do TLS then, ain't it?
They're like, we can't do TLS. You're like, oh, well, can you do that? It's like, well, we can't even do TCP. It's like, well, damn.
Well, okay. Well, back to the drawing board then, right?
Right.
It's one of those things where it evolved out of the necessity of bandwidth, not out of the necessity of kind of security and integrity.
So yeah, you end up in a situation where you could figure out, you could take the lessons learned in the corporate world and the enterprise world and say like, okay, we've got an Ethernet switch. We know how to secure these things, so let's do it. And then, but the very first time you try to do something, you run into these kind of roadblocks that these are not laptops. These are ECUs that don't do like this the standard technology.
Even the
that we
Linux
expect.
8021X client works fairly well, but you don't even have such things right now in these type of components. Do a search for yourself.
Yeah, so Velodyne is the biggest manufacturer of LiDAR. So if you go to their site and you want to know about 8021X support for that, they don't even talk about it. Like it doesn't exist. And then like if you go and ask it about TLS.
Sweet. 2 hits.
Yeah, so they actually have TLS. Oh, no, wait. Actually, what they have
It's terrestrial laser scanner shit.
Right. Oh, well.
Out of luck. I mean, I'm sure that's rad. It sounds rad, but
It sounds
not
like
gonna
way
help
more
us
rad
then.
than TLS, actually, but it doesn't help you when it comes time to secure the data that's going from the LiDAR to the computer.
Yep. So yeah, those are a bunch of hard things, but again, we talk about having to prioritize this stuff. Just like in the corporate or network world, you don't want to. You're not going to try to chase every bug and every flaw down, right? I'm sure there are memory corruption flaws in image parsers and things like that. But in reality, what are you concerned with? You're concerned with remote attacks that can compromise a vehicle, potentially pivot, and physically control it. Like that is the biggest kind of fear that we would have that could happen. And that's how we do our security, and that's how we model our threats, is that's what we're really concerned with.
Yeah, if you work in the corporate world, you're familiar with the fact you don't have unlimited resources. If you did, you could secure everything. But we have finite resources and finite time, and so you have to prioritize where you put your efforts, and this is our #1 priority. We don't want an attack that scales to the whole fleet and you can do remotely and take down every single car at once. Like, that's the #1 thing that we focus on and make hard. #2, so the second thing we focus on, and once we've devoted enough resources to that we feel comfortable, the next thing is we worry about, well, remote attacks, but you got to be kind of close. And so this is the things that we talked about, like with Bluetooth or you know, the base station, the malicious base station, something like that. And so these are still dangerous. Like, you don't have to have the car, you don't have to physically touch it, but you have to at least be nearby. So it doesn't scale to the whole fleet, it just scales to some location where the bad guy is. And so we worry about this, but not quite as much.
And you know, as defenders, we're familiar with how attackers abuse these type of things, right? You can think about this just as you would any pen test if you're a consultant, right? You're going to look at Wi-Fi, you're going to look at whatever radio they have, you're going to look at Bluetooth. So the reason we definitely, this is second on our priority list, is because it's kind of known attack surface, right? The cellular vehicle stuff is still pretty bespoke. There's only 3 groups on the planet that kind of have done that. But this stuff is, you know, kind of more commoditized.
The next up is physical attacks. So we do care about physical attacks because they can affect the car, but not as much, because if you got to physically tamper with the car, you're more likely to get caught. It doesn't scale. Hopefully we can detect these things have happened. And so this is lower on the priority list. And basically the 3 ways this could happen is you could imagine someone plugging a device into a port that's in the car, or wiring a device directly into a CAN bus, or trying to reflash the firmware on devices we have.
Trying to become A+ certified on our compute stack.
Yeah, he looks like he already got that certification.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, when you're focusing on the remote attacks and the remote aspect, a lot of it is, you know, authorization and integrity issues, and these also help resolve the physical issues, right? You could imagine that certain messages are signed so that only you know, the proper authority can say turn the wheel of the car. Even if you're physically jacked in, you're not going to have our signing keys, and you shouldn't be able to get them, and therefore that physical attack might be kind of moot as well.
So I mentioned this earlier, and some of the attacks that you hear about in the press that get all the headlines are stuff that we actually don't care about. So there's this article about, like, oh, by putting tape on stop signs, you can trick self-driving cars into not stopping.
Wrong.
Right. Wrong.
Wrong.
So this is an example of if a reporter would have asked us, we would have said this is stupid, and then they wouldn't have quoted us, and then the article still would have came out exactly like this. But the point is that the way that their attack worked is, they were using, like, the camera would see the thing and use OCR to figure out what it said, and now they think it says love or something instead of stop. I don't know why there would be a love sign up, but anyway.
I love to stop, baby.
Love it. So the point is that the self-driving cars don't do that. Self-driving cars don't take, you know, camera images and try to parse out the signs from the image. That's not the way they work. The way they work is they have a detailed map. The map says where the stop signs are. No matter what you put on the stop sign, you tear the stop sign down, car's still going to stop because it knows there was a stop sign supposed to be there because it's on the map. It doesn't even look for a stop sign. It just knows where the stop signs are.
Another thing to realize, too, is, yes, these cars do machine learning, right? But how do you train those machine learning models? You have hundreds, if not thousands, of labelers. So when I said they're out mapping the street, taking pictures and everything that the machine learning engine can't figure out, you physically send to a person. There are rooms full of people at Uber, at Cruise, at Waymo, clicking, saying, yes, that is a stop sign. Yes, that is a bicycle. So again, it's not just, hey, take a picture of some sign and we think it's a stop sign. Like, the machine learning models they use are heavily groomed and take thousands of man hours to do. So again, it's not just some open source software package, you're good and it works. Like, there's a lot of work involved.
Basically, the theme of this talk is we just rain on all other research that's not ours. But
it's kind of what we do.
Here's another one that we want to rain on. So we already talked about this a bit. So it's like, I'll jam the GPS and crash all the self-driving cars. Already said, self-driving cars don't use GPS. They use localization, so jam all you want. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah, these cars know, you know, like we said, up to the centimeter where they're going. So as long as they know where they're at when they start, you don't need anything. It just kind of knows. It has this map, and it can drive around. It can go to point A and point B.
Right. So maybe someday in the future that would be a deal for like kit, but it's not a deal for self-driving cars at level 4. All right. So let's talk about what we do and the sort of defense that we build into self-driving cars to secure them. Right. So we care a lot about that, and we spend every day trying to do it. And these are sort of some of the approaches that we use to try to defend them.
I think the biggest one that we really try to do, and this is probably because Charlie and I have spent most of our career on the opposite side of the table breaking stuff, is reducing attack surface. We know for sure that we can't write secure software. Shit, we know for sure we can't make secure hardware because we've made careers out of breaking that stuff. So what's the best method to secure this? Remove it. If you don't need that software, off. If you don't need the hardware, kill it. Right? This is probably the biggest thing that we do because we know that if it's removed, it's actually more secure.
Yeah. The next thing we do is we make sure that the code that's running on all the computers in the car is really our code. And we use secure boot for that, verified boot. And so we make sure that the code that's running is cryptographically signed. Only we can do that. And so this makes sure that it hasn't been tampered with or that no one else can reflash it.
If you saw in all 3 attacks, what happened? All 3 attackers, us, the UWash, and the Keen team, we had to reprogram something. With code signing and verification, any bit modified to that code would fail, right? And it wouldn't be reflashed. Not to say that that would completely prevent us from figuring out a way to execute code, and not all verified boot implementations are flawless, but it makes it much, much more difficult.
Right. So if Fiat Chrysler would have had code signing on that gateway chip when we were attacking the Jeep, we probably would have never gotten past that.
Yeah, I remember we had that bug, though.
I know, but I'm pretty lazy. I don't know if I would have done it.
I think we would have got it.
We wouldn't have. So
we would have got it.
We wouldn't have. Anyway, the point is, it would have been so much harder that if we couldn't have just reprogrammed that chip with no security at all. But if they would have had code signing, it would have been.
We probably would have had a Black Hat talk about how we almost made the car move.
Yeah. What we would know is we would have Black Hat talk in like 2020 about how we hacked the 2014 Jeep.
Yeah.
So it would have been delayed many years. Oops. I forgot that's all one slide now.
Key storage for things like that. Like I said, identity and authorization for these type of things is paramount. We want to ensure that messages that control the vehicle, that physically control it, are actually signed by the proper authorities and verified on the other end. Again, we've pulled keys out of hardware before. We've pulled keys out of software. So we want to make sure that a lot of these devices that we're using have things like hardware security modules or TPMs, right? So we can have some anchor, some trust anchor in there so we can sign things and verify them without having to worry about someone grabbing our vehicle, ripping one of these out, and having our keys forever.
Yeah. And so next thing, encryption, that's a no-brainer. We encrypt the data when it leaves the car. We encrypt what we can on the car, so if it gets stolen, we don't lose that. Code sign we already mentioned, so any code that we download, any updates have to be signed. Make sure it's legitimate, so we aren't just accepting code blindly.
Yep. I think I mentioned message signing several times, but I think one of the key pieces that's lacking now, and we're spending a fair amount of effort on, is threat detection. We know, again, as attackers, that there's really no such thing as an unhackable system. We make careers out of doing that, but we do want to know if something is astray. And the good part about these networks, while they're similar to your corporate data centers, they're dissimilar in we know what traffic will be there. There's not users browsing the web, right? Even though Ethernet traffic is there, it's standard. We know what we should expect, and if we see things that stray from that, we can at least raise a flag.
All right, it's a bunch of computers that we design talking to each other in a very standard, predictable way, and so attacks, things that are unusual, things like we did in the Jeep, really stand out. So it's pretty easy to detect that something weird's going on. Let's wrap it up.
Wrap it up, B. As you see, right now, there have been very few instances of remote attacks to cars for physical control. That being said, we're super concerned with it because it entails passenger safety, and driverless cars kind of make some things easier because we have some liberties that most car owners don't. They come home every day. And some things harder because there are no steering wheels and they are more complex and there's a lot more to review.
Right, and so like if you're a researcher out there, like the reason we released our tools and we wrote a bunch of papers is we want to get people involved. So continue hacking stuff. break cars, write papers.
Release all your information so everyone can learn from it, right? I mean, we've had many times where people came up to us, were like, hey, thanks for releasing all those papers. Now my department has more budget at car company to not be named, right? So it's cool, and we want people to do that. When we've only looked at a few cars, we want people to look at a bunch of cars, so then we can have even more data points and think about the overall security of all these vehicles in a better fashion.
Yeah, when we hacked a car, we didn't want to be the car hackers forever. We wanted to be like those guys who hacked the car along with like the 50 other people who hack cars and helped find bugs and that sort of thing. So keep it up.
With that being said, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for
thanks.
Countermeasure for having us. We had a blast.